to welcome our panelists to the dais and introduce Jason Jordan. Everybody, many of you probably know Jason. He will be moderating our panel discussion. Jason is the Director of Policy and Government Affairs for APA and also works with chapters on legislative issues and programs at the state level. So, Jason.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. We're all glad to be here. Again, my name is Jason Jordan. I am APA's Director of Policy and Government Affairs. Delighted to welcome to the stage Robin Rather and Sam Staley for what I think will be an interesting and energetic discussion focused on communication challenges and contentiousness in the planning process. So we're formatted this. Let me say just a word about how we're going to approach this. It is billed in your programs as sort of a point-counterpoint discussion. I'm going to give each of them about 10 to 15 minutes to make a sort of opening remarks, and then we will have some questions from me as the moderator to them, and we're going to certainly give you a chance as you're listening to their presentations and thinking about this topic. Do start thinking about your questions. Before we get started, let me just briefly introduce them. I'll start with Robin. Robin is the CEO of Collective Strength. Her organization works on a lot of planning issues and has played an instrumental role in a lot of communities, helping them with communications, general strategy, public engagement, and market research as they move through planning initiatives. She's currently doing a lot of work in the Nashville region, but has worked all over the country. APA is certainly no stranger to Robin. She's been working with us for the last year as we've been working on our own communication strategy to deal with some of the challenges that are out there. And then we'll have Sam Staley. He is the Managing Director of the DeVoe Center at Florida State University and familiar to many of us from his long tenure at the Reason Foundation. Sam has been an important voice in the planning community for a long time, and certainly delighted to have him join us today. I think it's no secret that planning has long attracted vigorous and sometimes contentious and sometimes downright difficult and nasty debate at the local level. In a very real sense, that's what planning generates by design, bringing people into a process, they attempt to seek common solutions through the planning process. At the same time, while that has been part of the story of planning for a long time, we do face what appears to many of us to be a new environment with new critics, old attacks, but new tactics. And often we're finding that the engagement process at the local level is generating a lot more heat these days than light. And planners are struggling in many ways to adjust their own strategies for dealing with this and still advance important projects and good planning in their community. So we're going to talk today and have each of them sort of give their perspective on how do we find common ground in this period, how do we communicate effectively, and what is actually happening out there in the public and in the political universe as people begin to engage at the local level on planning issues. So with that, I think Sam's going to kick things off, so I'm going to turn the podium over to him. Sam, welcome.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you to Alex and those at the Florida American Planning Association for inviting me to actually do these comments and talks and give you my perspective. I really do appreciate this because even though I was at the Reason Foundation for a long time, actually, and I am a self-identified libertarian, so I'm a limited government guy. But on the other hand, I've also have a deep respect for planning and land use planning on the local level, in large part because up until moving to Florida 2 years ago, I was a long-time resident of my hometown community, lived there 48 years, almost without interruption except for college and taking jobs outside of the town. And I was heavily involved in my community, not only as Charter Review Commission chairman, but also on the Planning Commission, also working with the Property Review Commission. And ultimately, probably most controversial was when we were looking at consolidating an unincorporated area with our city. And so I've been very used to the kinds of problems that we run into on the local level, and I recognize that there's real practical problems we have to address. And planners are in the forefront of that, and planning is in the forefront of that. So despite my libertarian views, actually maybe because of it, it sort of changed the way I think about how we try to bring people together to move forward. But when I was looking at the job at Florida State, one of the interesting, what I did not expect to be doing would be teaching in an urban planning department. I'm actually the managing director of the DeVoe L. Moore Center, which is an interdisciplinary research center focusing on housing, land use, and growth management issues. And frankly, I know Harvard Chairman's out there probably wringing his hands when I'm embarrassment in some way. But at one point, when we sort of looked at my background and recognized that while I'm fairly contrarian, and I'm not an AICB certified planner, but I've published in planning journals, and this has been the sort of regulatory approach that's been a focus of my professional career. One of the things the chairman told me was that one of the things that we sort of recognized with the tremendous changes in Florida with the, essentially the fading away of the statewide growth management law, is that maybe we need to have more of a contrarian perspective being taught in the classroom so that our students could be more prepared with the diversity of opinion out there that may not be in alignment with the way we typically think about it. So we actually sat down and thought about this. And I love the idea of being able to go into the classroom and talk to potential planners to sort of give them at least my perspective, but also I know the area well enough that I can do justice to planning as well. So even though I don't agree necessarily with the entire profession in terms of where it's coming from, I think I can not only represent it, but not only that, they're all master's students. They're getting this stuff anyway, so I'm not that concerned about it as long as it's balanced and fair in the classroom. And part of that, interestingly enough, was the development of a new class, which we designed that, because I also was thinking more in terms of not just the theoretical stuff about what's planning supposed to be, what's this theoretical relationship about individual and local government. I was also very, very involved and interested in process. And how do we actually do this on the ground? In fact, almost all of my policy work for the last 25 years has really been about implementation. And in fact, one point one of my colleagues said, well, Sam, how are you a libertarian? And I said, well, I study implementation. How can you not be a libertarian? Simply because it's a really messy process. And but the practical part of that, I think, is really important. I think planning serves a crucial role in it. So we developed this course that is really about controversy and planning. How do you resolve that in a practical way on the local level? So essentially what the course is designed, it's actually set up as a debate. Of course, I'm also very interdisciplinary. So I've got degrees in economics, political science. My PhD is actually in public administration, urban planning concentration, and all this other, and regulation, and that type of thing. So in this course, I actually tee up 13 controversies in planning that I actually take from the planning profession and the kinds of things we deal with on a day-to-day basis. And we essentially workshop through a debate format with the students every week. But here's the kicker. Each student is assigned a con. They have to take a hardline con. In other words, this is a hardline pro. They cannot deviate. They have to do the research. And if it's on housing affordability and land use, they have to either be saying that regulation causes all housing to be unaffordable. That's one side, one student. And the other is going to say planning has nothing to do with housing affordability. And then the rest of the class is, frankly, the regular citizens who are just trying to figure out what's going on. But the third thing about this, which is the most important one in terms of this class, is there is someone who is responsible for being the facilitator. When you sort of think about this as me when I was the planning board chairman, or if you're a professional planner trying to run a charrette or something like a consultant. And their role is to, with all this controversy, move forward. Come up with a way, common ground, shared agreement on something in this really controversial topic, and then move the project forward so you can actually achieve something of consequence that's going to be good for the community. So, and that's worked out really well so far. I'm really excited about it. And again, it's not one of these things where you're going to come out of this saying, oh, well, there's obviously, this is the answer one way or the other. The reality is, on the ground, we have to deal with things where we don't always have that kind of consensus. But somehow we've got to bring the community together, or bring the commission meeting or whatever public hearing together so we can actually move forward and there has to be some sort of consensus. All right, how does this sort of work into these new controversies with the Tea Party, actually Tea Party conservatives or whatever you might want to call them. And, well, here's the way I've broken this down. And again, I'm not a stranger to controversy, and I really feel like, personally, I've failed if I've not been able to move the topic forward in controversy, when we deal with controversy, whether it's approving a subdivision or putting transportation infrastructure in, stormwater runoff, environmental problems, whatever. When I look at the this new activism on the local level, and I think about the Tea Party and how that is articulated, I kind of go back and look at really why are these people engaged and why are they active in the first place. When I would go into a planning commission meeting, we'd have some, you'd have NIMBYs coming in, of course, this is all familiar stuff. My first question is not how uninformed are they. My first question is, well, what are they really concerned about? Is there really something I need to be paying attention here to that we need to address? And what I see when I see the Tea Party, which I also believe is not really yet coalesced into a real movement, a real clear national identity yet. What I do see is a lot of activism. And I see a couple of issues that have really pulled a lot of people together into that now they will self-identify themselves as Tea Partiers. And again, as a libertarian, I'm not necessarily with them, but I'm certainly on many of their issues I actually agree with them. But the most important issues for me are the ones where I think that really got the whole movement started, which is really a fundamental fiscal conservatism. And part of that is recognizing that, well, I think the issues were the bailouts. TARP was another one. Another issue which is belief in overreach, that they just seem to see that government was overreaching, particularly on the national level. That activism then got translated into the local level, but here's kind of where I think it gets complicated. Because at least my read on the way many of these Tea Partiers or conservative activists that they come in, many of them don't have a lot of direct experience with local government. They actually don't know what we do on a day-to-day basis. And so part of what the activism has been stimulated by is sort of misperception about what happens, a sort of failure to recognize that on the local level, in fact, we're dealing with some real practical things. It's not really about partisanship. It's not, as a matter of fact, I would say that on the work that I do on the county level, on the local level, the differences between Democrats and Republicans are almost not even worth mentioning, because the reality is we're trying to come up with a solution to a problem or address a bigger issue that goes beyond party affiliation or, for that matter, partisan ideology. And so what I would typically do, and I think something that I considered in this process is, to some extent, to some of the people who are reasonable and are actually sincerely interested in being part of the process, you try to identify what those issues that they care about are, and then try to determine whether or not it's something that they should be addressing, how you would address it. So part of this is, frankly, bringing in a whole new group of people that haven't been that active on the local level. They were maybe been on the soccer fields with their kids or maybe actually active in their school, but certainly not in the planning board commission meetings or attending charrettes or whatever it might be, and then figuring out how they can become part of the process and being productive in that process, which is a challenge. I don't want to dismiss, I don't want to say it's all easy, or it's just a matter of that. But I do think that these new activists represent a fundamental shift in the sense of concern about what government is doing, the scope of what the scope of government is, and how their tax dollars are being spent. It was articulated in the early stages of the Tea Party on the federal level. That's where we had these rallies that, and frankly, I think that was really important for understanding the 2010 election. I think now, though, is that I think there's a lot of no one's really sure where it's going at this point. Every time I see a sort of organized Tea Party, I kind of wonder how is it similar or different from other Tea Parties that I've seen. I know that in Florida, in fact, there are at least two organized Tea Party groups that are actually hate each other. They don't talk to each other. They don't even go to each other's rallies because they disagree so much. And that's something to keep in mind, because I think it's easy to take labels and then just sort of apply these labels across the board. But in fact, a lot of these people that are coming in and sort of now motivated to be involved on the local level have very specific and individual issues. I think it's the key keys to try and figure out how we address them. So, in moving forward, the way I think about this is, again, I try to individualize this. I try to get away from the labels. And in part, my experience has been, I'm a libertarian, work for Reason Foundation. We've got our share of wackos, share of people that are reasonable. I have been working in what some have called the Koch-topus, the Koch brothers funding apparatus, for actually most of my career. My first job out of college was working for the Cato Institute. I understand how that works internally, but I also understand that the biggest barrier for me in getting something done practically is often when somebody has attached a label to me, and then they bring all sorts of other interpretations about what I'm doing or what I'm trying to accomplish, what my intent is, which mucks things up. So I just go back to what I did when I was working in my civic groups. I don't look at them as a Tea Party. I don't look at them as a Republican or Democrat. I look at the issue that they're bringing to the table, and I ask myself, can I work the public environment in a way to try and determine whether or not there's some there. In other words, is there something that they're bringing to the table that we need to address? And by individualizing it, what I find is that it can be a pretty effective tool for diffusing some of the ideology that gets in the way of getting stuff done. Also, the other thing I find is that if I can do that, is that it's become a pretty effective way, as a practical matter, to deal with the extreme of the extreme, in the sense that as everyone in this room probably knows, there are people that have come into our planning board meetings or city commission meetings, and it just doesn't seem to matter. They're just not unreasonable. They're going to be opposed, one way or the other. And I think the first couple of years in my planning commission, when I was running these commissions, I spent way too much time on the people that were just mucking the system up. And what I found, and this is sort of the journey that I think is important for us, is how you deal with the sort of new round of conservative activists as they're coming in, that if I still would treat that person with respect, and I would honestly try to listen to what they were saying, try to pull something out that, in fact, we might be able to address, whether it was through a city commission meeting or was having to do with a plan, or frankly, a lot of times it was that they were concerned about what was going to happen with their property itself. What would happen is, even if we could disagree, if we couldn't come to agreement on what they wanted to accomplish, two things happened. I was surprised at how many times the person would leave the podium, the citizen would leave the podium and say, I still disagree with you, but thank you for listening to me. That was one thing. The second thing was that I was able to move the entire agenda forward because that individual was an individual. And most other people could see that extremism for what it was, which was narrow, often very narrow and self-interested, and not really concerned with the public interest, which is what I was there to do as part of a member of my commission. As a libertarian, I was that, and that was my role. So what I found is that, I think I discovered as part of this, is that planners have the tools to be able to address these issues in a very concrete way. I've seen in the classroom now that I actually run this experiment that even when I have consciously set up issues to polarize, because that's part of the exercise, at the end of each week we come up with 3 or 4 issues where there's enough common agreement we can move the project forward. And even students that have been doing this for 25 to 30 years can identify that, move that forward. We have the tools to be able to do this. We can actually move the community forward. We can actually address these issues in a constructive way. But I think the key is to recognize that there may be a different set of values that are being brought into the discussion. And those values, I think by approaching it on a personal level and identifying, or at least trying to understand those values, is really ultimately the key to trying to get through this morass that's sort of emerged as part of this new controversy. So I'm going to stop there because I don't have time. And look forward to your questions, and we'll look forward to listening to what Rob has to say. Thank you.
So much that all adversaries planted were as nice, open-minded, reasonable as sailors. And that was not what we even have this conversation. So thank you, Sam, for elevating what otherwise would be kind of an ugly little spar session. Those of you that know me will be quite shocked. I don't have PowerPoint, and I don't have 5 million pieces of data from my most recent poll to show you. I apologize. If you want that, I can provide that later. I I was so worried that I wouldn't have anything at all in common with Sam, that when I found out he wasn't going to do PowerPoint, I was like, okay, boom, I won't do PowerPoint either. It's all ground. So I have these, this is so old school, it's not even funny. I haven't actually used index cards since the 4th grade. Then I did my classes, so y'all might have to bear with me. I'll see if I can match Sam for a PowerPoint free presentation. I want to start off by saying I'm going to speak from the heart today. All joking aside, part of why I did bring my batch of data is I think this is a very emotional topic. It is for me. And I want to start off by just saying why I love planners. I'm so honored to be here. And I've said this many times before, but I want to say it directly to you, each of you. I love planners with all my heart. I love working with planners because you're so visionary. You not only have a vision of the future, usually in your PowerPoint, you've got cool photos and maps of it. And you know, honestly, I love you for that. I really, really do. I love working with planners. You're so smart. I would say smart to the point of being super geeky. I love geeky. But let me tell you what, most of the planners I know and have been privileged to work with are not, they don't really like competition. They really, really love consensus. They will do almost anything to get consensus, and most of y'all are so well trained, you can get consensus almost any time, no matter who shows up in the room. Most of you are not hyper-political. I said I don't have anything in common with Sam except to go on PowerPoint. I'm definitely not libertarian. But I am that category of people. I used to think of myself as a Democrat. I could not give you a label for what I am right now. But I am intensely interested in politics. Most planners I know want to stay very far above politics. Most planners I know secretly want the elected officials to handle the politics so they can handle the maps and photos and the full vision of the future. And I respect that about planners. The problem is right now, I don't know about you, and I think I'm trying to be very bipartisan here, but I'm just not sure that the elected officials at any level in America are really going to be able to pull that off. I think the politics have gotten even too out of control and chaotic for the politicians themselves. And that puts us all in a bit of a bind. And so I want to spend a few minutes just talking about what is so different about this time. What is it about this point in history? I'm going to read you a partial list of the seismic shifts that we have all just lived through just since 9/11. Terrorism, attitudes towards oil and energy have changed dramatically. We've had a systemic economic failure, not just in the U.S., but worldwide. We have the whole rise of the term banksters and a lot of the bitterness towards the banking industry, the bailout, and a lot of frustration and confusion around that. We've had the housing collapse. We've had a ridiculous number of weather-related catastrophes. We've had a huge amount of political stalemate. Even after Obama really raised our expectations and our hopes so high that we'd be able to cut through that and actually get somewhere. And whether you voted for Obama or didn't or going to or not, he's our president, let's, hope for him. Obama was at one point maybe the best communicator the country had ever seen, with the possible exception of Ronald Reagan. And I think a lot of what happened is he did such a good job of making us feel like we could do something different. And then got to Washington and I'm just speaking factually, not politically, wasn't exactly able to do everything that he had hoped to do. If you can't hear me in the back, I apologize. I'll try to speak a little closer to the microphone. It's hard to speak close and read these crazy things. I really miss my PowerPoint, I'm just saying. The problem is, I think we got our hopes up, a lot of us, very high when the president came into office. And then I think by any objective standard, you'd have to say he completely discommunicated about a lot of things for the next 2 years, almost straight through. He did some incredible policy things. He did an interview with Charlie Rose recently, where he himself said that he was totally focused on what he thought his job was, which was policy work. And he said that he forgot that the commander-in-chief is supposed to also be the commander in storytelling. And the issue is, I could go on and on with my partial list of these seismic shifts. You see if I've forgotten anything major. Oh, besides the political stalemate, fundamental constitutional rights have been summarily rolled back. We've had divisive attacks on immigrants. We've had the whole Citizens United corporate personhood thing. And of course, we've had the rich elites versus the 99%. That's just the partial list. If you really think about it, just for a second, everybody should be very bewildered by that. That's just a little bit of what we've all just lived through. My son was born in June of 2001. He's 11 now. And so when we're doing comp plans for the next 25 years, I often think about my son. He's going to be about 30 when some of these comp plans are fully implemented, if they're ever being implemented. And in the short time that he's been alive, we've lived through more history in 10 years that a lot of people have lived through their whole lives. And so what I wanted to talk to you all about today is the emotional context that we're working in. The psyche of the American people, I feel, has dramatically changed. And here's what I call the core of the problem. What Americans do really well is swagger. We do dreaming really well. We do pull ourselves up from the bootstraps really well despite all odds. What we don't do well is fundamental insecurity. And that's what a lot of us are feeling right now when you look at the financial, banking industry or your own wallet. It's a very insecure time. And the emotional context there is extremely difficult. So what you have is a whole different kind of emotional intensity. You have this new insecurity which nobody really knows how to handle. As Sam spoke to, you have a tremendous amount of anger out there. It's almost like free radical anger. People just angry, not necessarily at something specific that you planners might be able to fix, because I know you want to. You have a tremendous amount of free-ranging anger and frustration, and the problem is people are also absolutely craving positive change. I mean, craving it like never before. And they're not getting it from their elected leaders of any party. They're getting a lot of just ugly tirades, to be honest with you, a lot of the time. And so what does this have to do with planning, probably? Well, from my perspective, what it has to do with planning is you guys have to really get a lot more comfortable with the idea of confrontation. And I know that doesn't come easily to you. I know you want the big consensus, and that's what you train for. That's where the big joy comes in for you all. But how do you get consensus? Now, Sam, I just want to tell you something. I like Sam. I just met him yesterday. I have tremendous respect for him. But one of the things he said he didn't really want to do was talk about Agenda 21. And if you notice, he didn't say that much about it. And I feel a certain responsibility to call that lucky. Those of you that know me know I'm going to have to say this exactly like I see it. Not everybody in the Tea Party is part of the anti-Agenda 21 campaign. But the people that are different in a lot of ways than the typical stakeholders that you all have dealt with your whole careers. What Sam was talking about were those people who would come in and really be angry, but they had a point of view. They had something they wanted or they didn't want. They maybe had a lot of emotional intensity, but you could work with them. You could bring them into the consensus. You pride yourself on this. I know a lot of planners, they live for that moment where they have an unhappy stakeholder and they've got the ability to figure out how to weave it together and build that consensus and get everybody moving in the right direction. A lot of you you're so talented at that. The problem with what's happened with the attack on planning from Agenda 21 folks is they don't look like the typical cranky stakeholder, right? They're not there to become part of the process, and they really don't want to be part of the process. They're there to shut the process down. And that, for a lot of you, is completely flummoxing. Wait a second, how can we just shut the process down Isn't there some way we can find some common ground? And the problem that I hear from them over and over is I can't figure out what they want. What do they want? I could deal with it if I knew what they wanted. I don't know. I can't shut that process down. That's what holds the whole thing together. That's what makes it fair. That's how we make good decisions. So I just want to point out that I empathize greatly with what a lot of you have gone through with a very new agenda, the 21 situation. When I spoke at the APA National Conference in Boston, which is the first time I could barely spell APA before that, in Boston, some of you will remember, and this was, I believe, Florida, it was right after your growth management system had taken quite a large hit. I think it was going to be that same month. And so there was a lot of I think almost despondence among normally optimistic planners. And part of it was because the attack from Agenda 21 was something of an ambush. They caught a lot of us by surprise. We didn't really understand what it was or where they were coming from. But that was almost 2 years ago. Okay? Part of what I wanted to say today is I think we've gotten past the point where we can be blaming Agenda 21 or anybody else. We understand what that movement is. We understand what's behind it. We understand how to do the pivot. We understand how to work with it now. We've done a whole poll. We know exactly how many people aren't in support of Agenda 21, how many people really feel they need planning, which is 2/3 or more of the country. And so my point today is we need to get past the point where we're woe is me over Agenda 21 and get back to ourselves, what we're capable of doing. In this new emotional context, I think planners have to do some different things or some of the same things a little bit differently. And I was going to say, one of those things is dealing with the emotional intensity, dealing with the rise of the Tea Party, dealing with the fact that it's normal now to have disruptors that aren't just trying to get into the process and make themselves heard, they're trying to shut it down. Past all that, I would like to go back to the 90s, by the way. I would love that. I would go back to the 90s now. I'd like to go back to that time, pre-9/11, with those kind of budgets, that kind of an economy, when we were all really comfortable in our government. I'd be the first one to take the train back there if I could. But you know what? I don't think that's ever going to happen. This is what's important. I think you all as planners are needed now more than absolutely ever been needed, ever. Partially because of what I said, people are craving a positive view of the future. Nobody, lawyers don't do that, bankers don't do that, MBAs don't know how to do that. Teachers, I love teachers, bless their hearts, they don't really know how to do that. Planners are uniquely qualified to do exactly what the country needs most right now. And a lot of the country's looking to various political parties for it. And guess what? They're not going to get it there. If it's going to happen, it's going to be you guys doing what you do best. I do think there's a few things, I have a little checklist here, things I'd like you to do better, if you don't mind. I need you to have much better messaging. I'd say about 90% of the problem when plans have gotten defunded or off track, most of the time I would look right at the messaging and say, not sharp enough, not resonant enough, not carrying its weight. We're competing for fiscal resources like we've never competed before. And a big part of our job is to say, you know what, this project is worth funding, and those aren't for these reasons. Now, I talked before about MBAs. I know a lot of you are saying, I don't want to calculate the return on investment of my project. I don't want to do a spreadsheet that talks about the investment, economic development people do that. Planners don't do that. Well, you know what? Right now, the economy and jobs is the #1 issue in the country. 82% of the country agrees with this statement. Economic recovery and job creation is the biggest issue of our generation. Not the biggest issue today, the biggest issue of this year, next year, the biggest issue of our generation. If we're going to be the greatest generation, it's going to be because we figured out our economic issues, our systemic economic issues. A lot of planners are like, that, go away with that. you know what? And I know a lot of you, what do you want to be talking about? Oh, you want to talk about climate change, sustainability, land use, transportation. That's where density. Okay? The problem is, I have no problem with you doing those things as long as you message about them in terms of relevant framing, like what does that have to do with the economy? What does that have to do with job creation? That's where we have to live, like it or not. The next thing, I think we have to get much better at inclusion. Okay, most of you are very proud of your outreach efforts. But however great you've been, we have to be so much better. Mitch talked earlier today about different demographic changes. We have never had more connectivity. This is the most connected set of generations. You can't even say connected generation because my mom, like your mom, is already all over Facebook. So we've got tremendous connectivity. There's no excuse for us not to have 50 times the inclusivity that we've ever had before. Another just a little thing on the checklist, we have to be much more proactive. Yesterday in our communications workshop, Jason said, I'm asking you not to hide. A lot of planners saw this sort of crazy set of seismic shifts, and we're like, okay, crash position, let me just ride this out, don't call any attention to myself or my department, maybe we can just get through this. I would say, wrong strategy. Get as proactive as you've ever been in your life. Go in the technology industry where I used to work, we had to say, go big or go home. And if that is not, planners don't brag about that. That's like a tech industry thing. You guys are so modest as a group. But honestly, this is the time to get as creative, as innovative, and as big-hearted as you have ever been in your whole careers. And come from there. I'm going to wrap up, I have quite a few more index cards, but I'm going to wrap up in the interest of having better Q&A with you all. I would say one thing about, just to go back to politics of it all for a second. One of the most frustrating things with the Tea Party, Agenda 21, that whole sort of political force, what I hear from a lot of you is they don't have any ideas. They're not bringing any ideas to the table. If they had an idea, I could work with it. This is their one big idea, and it's huge. It's incredibly important. Their big idea is don't spend money we don't have. Their big idea is we're broke as a country. In some states it's we're broke as a state. In some cities it's we're broke as a local government. Their big idea is don't spend money we don't have. And there's a tremendous amount of emotional intensity that comes with that, not just for the right wing, but for a lot of people in America. And so one of the challenges we have is, can we plan? Can we do really cool plans without a huge price tag? Can we chunk it down and have those returns on investment so clear that they're easy to get funded? That's one of our big challenges. I see that as an issue of innovation. I see that as something we can absolutely do if we're determined to do it and we're not floating around back in the 90s just waiting for the big gravy train to come. So I'll leave you with this. Actually, I'm going to leave you the way I started with it. I love you all for your big visions and for your pictures of the future and your ability to get people to see what it could be. What it could be. And I am so excited to see how you all, now that we've had the big attack on planning and we've taught ourselves how to deal with that, I'm very excited to see how you all innovate and make those incredible visions and incredible maps and photos actually become real. And I so respect you for being the only people that actually might be able to pull that off. Thank you very much.
It's really hard for somebody who spends their day job in politics to be a moderator. There's a full of opinions. I'm going to do my best to be even-handed and not interject my own thoughts here. But before I open it up for your questions, I do have a number of questions based on the comments that you guys made. And let me just start on the Agenda 21 topic. Is the participation, the activism, that we're seeing from the Agenda 21 advocates, is it legitimate public participation? Ask for a vote.
Oh, I better let Sam go first.
That's how she was slamming our.
Exactly.
I think it's a really good question, frankly. I think that, and just so we're clear, I think the personally and professionally, I think the whole Agenda 21 issue is ridiculous.
Oh, I love this
But
man.
anyway. But the question,
Right,
that's
the
a really
libertarian
good
just said
question.
it's ridiculous. Good night, everybody.
And I'm not the only one, by the way, on the free market side that's actually said that either. So it's, but I think the question that Jason raises is a really, really important one because it really goes to the crux of whether or not these are people you can work with or people you can't. I think we've all known people that either through college or whatever, you're just not going to be able to work with them one way or the other. Those are the people that are purely obstructionists. They really aren't interested in moving any kind of debate forward or any kind of idea forward. But there is a component of the Agenda 21 people, and I run into these people, that simply don't know. There is an element to which, particularly in the Tea Party, there's again, going back to way back when I was first getting into libertarian, as Tom Robert and Jason earlier, my only political activism was in 1980 when I campaigned for Ed Clark in the Libertarian Party. I left politics after that, so it's been a long time. Part of it, though, part of the reason is because, one, I realized that I was interested in policy and not politics. But the other part of that is that I really was interested in working with people that wanted to move agendas forward. I mean, really wanted to do something. And that in any political party, whether it's Democrat, Libertarian, Socialist, Communist, or Republican, you're going to have an element that really doesn't care. They're just obstructionists. But then there's an element which they don't, that they're open to understanding more. I mean, I know a lot of people on the Tea Party side that when they started hearing the term smart growth, somebody linked it to Agenda 21 UN, and then for them it's a question of, is our sovereignty violent at some point? It becomes part of this conspiracy theory. But these are also people that you can work with and say, no, actually, what's Agenda 21 to them? They would actually say that will actually throw them off in some ways. So the problem is figuring out which one are they. Are they the people that just are uninformed and are just loyal citizens that want to be part of the process, or are they obstructionists? And I don't think it's a clean answer. Yeah.
Please give it.
I wish I could, but not too much now.
So your question was actually, is it legitimate? My clean answer to that is yes. It's absolutely legitimate. It's a legitimate emotion and legitimate pushback. What I think complicates that is whether or not you believe that Agenda 21 is funded by certain corporate interests. We've always had these ideas. The libertarian ideas have been around my entire life, and I'm ancient. And so none of these ideas are really new. What's new is the amount of funding behind it and the amount of training that a lot of these Agenda 21 activists have had. And the training is directly aimed at two things: disrupt the meeting and ridicule the people running the meeting in a very personal way. And not just in the meeting, but then put it up on YouTube. And that's happened in like 30 or 40 different states. I don't think, my own opinion is that any individual with anything that they have to contribute is legitimate. I think corporate interests trying to have even more share of voice than they have is not fair. And I do think that upsets the apple cart and takes a lot of the fairness factor out of it. One of the things, if you didn't sit at our table, you would have missed, Sam and I actually did spar quite a bit over lunch, over exactly how big the Tea Party is. And I think it's useful for you all to understand that. If you narrowly define the Tea Party in polls, like the Pew Center poll or the Washington Post poll, if you ask people, which of the following political parties do you most closely associate with, right? The number of people who most closely associate with the Tea Party is expressed as 25% of Republicans. If you do the math on that, that's like less than 10%, right? So it's a small number. It's a small number of people by that scale. But Sam actually doesn't define the Tea Party that way. He defines the Tea Party as anybody who's got big fiscal problems with the way our country is going right now. In my book, that's like 100% of the general public. So we're somewhere between 10% of the people and 100% of the people have really serious, emotionally intense problems with the way the fiscal landscape looks right now. Is that legitimate? Hell yes.
I'm gonna have to interject.
Oh,
My definition, I understand that. I believe the Tea Party, in the way that I would define the fiscal concern is really, in my view, looking at the numbers and the way the polls are parsed, is more like 30 to 40%. So, not 100%.
we can agree to disagree.
All right, I'm going to pick up on the fiscal stuff in just a second, but let me, you both use the phrase common ground in your remarks, and that a part of the challenge is to find common ground, to search for common ground. From your perspective, looking at the camps that we're talking about here today, whether they be Agenda 21 or Tea Party or other kinds of activists, where is the common ground? Is it either in terms of a message, substantive policy issue, general philosophy? Where's the common ground?
You're the one that teaches the class.
I don't know, Rob, you're throwing this over me too often. No, I think there's common. I mean, I think, actually, because at the end of the day, I think one of the things that Robin raised in one of her comments, I think really important, because one of the reasons why I'm here, not only just because I was invited to come, I said, yeah, sure, why not? But one of the reasons why I'm really glad I'm here, and one of the reasons why I really like, in many ways, the planning profession. I love planners themselves, but the planning profession I have even much respect for, is because there's a respect for the process that is fundamentally inclusive about bringing people in and trying to identify this common ground that allows us to move the public interest, the community interest forward. So I think the question for me is more, is the rise of the Tea Party, the rise of these activists, and I'm going to put the Agenda 21 people aside, for now, Robin could disagree with that. Is there does this represent a shift in tone in a fundamental way on the grassroots level? And I think there is, but I think there is a fundamental shift, and mainly around the fiscal issues. But there's a lot of common ground there, because at the end of the day, my read on most of this is that most people are still pretty pragmatic. And even among the people that I know and interact with that self-identify themselves with Tea Party or Tea Party values, they actually view themselves as pragmatists. They actually think that the reason I'm upset about where the country is going right now is because it is absurd that we're spending the amount of money that we're spending and we can't pay it back. So as long as there's that sort of framework that they're working with, that they view themselves as sort of pragmatic, I think there's a way you can get common ground. I think the common ground is actually one of the things that Robin identified. It's this idea of being fiscally responsible with what we do in planning. And we've been terrible at articulating that over the years. I've seen it firsthand. I've seen it in the planning journals. I've seen it in the way we covered it in our trade press. If we can start articulating those issues, those efficiency arguments, the productivity arguments, and tie those to outcomes, I think we're going to see a lot of this dissipate very quickly. I think it's going to be a transient, very short-term issue.
I'm so relieved. We actually do agree on something besides index cards. I think the common ground, the way I would just spin it out really quickly is don't spend money we don't have. So it really is all about just exactly how cost effective, how much smaller in scale can we get the same thing done. And the second thing that I hear a lot is fix what we have before you get fancy on it. This would be the vernacular way to say that. There's probably a more technical way. But so for me, what that means is if you're trying to pitch a streetcar or light rail or some alternative transit system, you probably need to fix the ridiculously anemic bus system first and show that that can be done and maximize that, optimize that, and get happy about it and explain why it's good for the economy, how you're getting people back and forth to their job, how you're doing that very cost effectively. Build some trust on fix what I got and then move on. That isn't necessarily what I see happening in almost any place I'm traveling these days. And that's just one example. I also want to go back to, in the APA poll, national poll that we did recently, we asked a series of questions. It was actually Mitch's suggestion. In your mind, what does an ideal community look like? And what we saw were so many people want local independent businesses, people want energy efficient homes, more and more people want some alternative transportation, especially seniors and especially the younger generation. I think asking people, what's your ideal? Forget politics, forget policy. Really, where would you like to live? What do you want it to look like? Going there and getting some common ground around that is a lot easier than debating some of the things that we've been debating. And honestly, I just don't think it's productive.
Sam, I want to direct something to you, then I'll give Robin a chance to rebut it. But it came from her mouth, so I want to give you a chance to let us know whether or not you agree with it. Robin said that our problem as planners in communications is one of messaging. That is, it's how we sell it, not what we're selling. Do you agree?
Actually, I do agree that planners don't message well. But I think here's another thing, and this is actually another thing that comes out of the class that I teach. And it's also important for understanding how you actually move these controversial issues forward. It's important to understand where you disagree as much as to understand where you agree. And you're not going to be able to move discussion forward in areas where you disagree. If there's a fundamental disagreement. So we try to just find a common ground. So, no, back to the question. I think there are going to be some places where there are fundamental disagreements about which direction the community should go. That is going to be reflected by some of the groups that are in these newly activized conservative groups. I'm not sure it's, frankly, over the last couple of years, I think there's a lot more common ground than I thought in the beginning. But one of the things that is playing out on the national level, but it hasn't quite made it to the local level yet, at least from what I've seen, is that one of the reasons we have such divisiveness on the national level is that there are some fundamental disagreements about what that role of government should be on the national level. It's not clear where who's going to win out in that, but with this anecdote, I'm curious, how many people in the room have either heard of or have read columns by Michael Barone? Okay.
3 people.
3 people.
No, 8.
8? Okay. Michael Barone is a Washington columnist, but actually he really became known because he wrote and eventually co-wrote this book called The Almanac of American Politics. He is, the Almanac of American Politics will tell you everything you need to know about every congressional district, every Senate district, every governor in the country. Michael Barone has been to every congressional district in the entire country over the years. Interesting. We were talking about this whole Tea Party stuff about a year and a half ago, and I was curious because this is the guy who's on the pulse of politics. I mean, there's very few people that are going to get better at this. And he's not the kind of guy who's just a pundit or just sort of pontificating. He actually comes from some real knowledge, and he's trying to understand what makes these congressional districts and the Senate districts and the states work. And so, well, what's really going on here? I mean, what's his take on it? So he said he hadn't seen a level of uncertainty and fluidness in the American political process since 1856. That, by the way, was the period of the ascendance of the Republican Party. And in just a matter of a decade, we went from a party that just basically didn't exist to electing a president. And so I think there's something more fundamental going on.
Dream on. Now I see.
No, what I'm saying is that there's a fluidness to the national political dynamic that I think is different. I'm not really sure where it's going to go, but I do think that there is a group, and I'm not going to say it's 50%. No, it's not 50%. But I think that's the key. I mean, if you've got 75%, there's no real controversy, right? I mean, where you end up getting the controversy is when you've got large pluralities of groups that are all trying to vie for attention in the political process. And 40% is enough to muck up a lot of stuff. And I think that there's this quite fundamental question about how far does the federal government go in terms of this? We're seeing it over healthcare. We're seeing it over other things. Now, it hasn't spilled over at the local level, but it wouldn't surprise me if it does.
I don't actually remember what Jason's question was. So I apologize for that.
It's communication versus substance.
Oh, we talked about.
Messaging.
Oh, I see.
Something substantive.
Right. So obviously, I think the messaging of planning is still stuck in the 90s. We talk all the time at the APA, and the APA is doing a great job, I think, giving some different options on, instead of talking about sustainability and smart growth and compact design and smart code, yada, 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 can we actually talk about things that real people view as priorities? To me, that's just, I'm sorry, it's completely obvious that shift needs to happen away from the 90s and into this decade. But I think what you're talking about is it's very important because I just want to say again, personally, I think there is no way that the Tea Party, people who even loosely associate with the Tea Party, is up even in the double digits, and there's absolutely no way it's in the 40 or 50%. We've clearly disagreed on that. But I do want to go back to what is happening, what is almost universal, is this, which is unprecedented, I think, is this uncomfortable feeling that both parties are totally bought and sold by K Street. I feel that I've been a lifelong Democrat, make no bones about it, right? I don't necessarily identify with the Democratic Party right now. It has nothing to do with Obama. I just don't know that it's as pure as I need it to be as an American. It seems there's a level of fear of corruption. Maybe it's not corrupt. Hope to God it's not corrupt, but it seems like maybe it is. And that is something that a lot of people, poll after poll, a lot of people feel like, wait a second, the stuff I've believed in my whole life, something's off. Something's really off. And so Sam claims all those people as Tea Party people. What I see in polls, whether it's Pew, the Washington Post, or anybody else, you have most people in the country used to be, 40% thought they were Republican, 40% thought they were Democratic, and there's like maybe 20% that were somewhere between no party, independent, Green Party, Libertarian, and something else. Well, that's shrinking, shrinking, shrinking. So more and more people are in this bucket of none of the above, independent, Tea Party, Libertarian, Green. More and more people are like, well, I don't know about these major corporate-owned parties, either one of them. That, I think, is a real issue. I don't necessarily think that's an issue that planners can solve, but I do think I think you're right, that this is a unique time in history where most people are not really sure what they used to be sure of. And that is causing a lot of insecurity.
Okay, I want to move this along a little bit. I want to get to a couple more issues before Alex yanks me off the stage, which I know she's perfectly prepared to do. You have both talked a fair amount about sort of the role of national politics and the ideological disputes at the national level sort of influencing this, and you both laid a lot of blame at the feet of either economic forces or corporate contributions and the like. I want to ask you whether or not, and clearly I think we would all agree that there's a lot of anxiety afoot in the country, and that's driving a lot of the difficulty with messaging and public participation. We also all know that the demographics of this country, particularly racial and ethnic demographics, but also things like household size and where people live, are changing. And that's clear. It's reported frequently in the mainstream media. It's not a hidden fact. Do you believe that the changing face of America is a factor in driving the anxiety that is out there, and is that manifesting itself in these disputes? That is, are there factors beyond sheerly economic factors that are at play in this? And if so, briefly, and I know it's hard to do briefly, but I'm going to ask both of you real quick here, what can planning do about that?
That's the hardest question I've heard in a long time. But here's how I would answer that. Most of you know I live in Texas. And I'm gonna let my idealist, my inner idealist wants to come out. I'm gonna let her out. In my view, the changing demographic is not something that people are anxious about. In fact, I did, in my Nashville work, in my comp plan in Nashville, we just did a poll. Nashville is diversifying very, very quickly. They have not only a lot of immigrants, they have a lot of refugees from different places around the country, and it has a hot economy, so people are moving there from all over. The question was, Nashville is diversifying and becoming more multicultural. Is this good, bad, or both for the city? Only 11% said it was bad. Okay? I believe that people are up for the multiculturalization. The younger generation is the most multicultural, in love with multiculturalism generation. The generation that's 18 to 34 now, the post-Benetton generation. I have a lot of optimism about that. Where I think there's a lot of tension, it's not about race, it's class. It's actually economic. So many people are so worried about their own financial situation and that of their children that it's incredibly painful. They can't see this. A lot of this has been commented on many times. Are we the first generation that looks at our kids? I look at my son all the time trying to think about his future. It's one of the reasons I ended up getting out of the tech industry and into sustainability and planning. I was that motivated about and worried about his future. That's how most people feel. They're not sure we're going to be able to pass on to the next generation anything that we had, or much of it. And that's what I think is different. I don't think it's the graying or the multicultural diversity or anything else. I think it's a lot of financial concerns.
Sam, thoughts in about a minute?
Yeah, in a minute. Actually, I agree with Ron. I think if we, the earlier presentation that Mitch presented on generations, I think is critically important for understanding this dynamic. It's class. The younger generations, it's not an issue. Where I think where you're seeing that 11% is among probably older generations rather than younger generations. I'm not sure what that would be. And again, I think, so it's a question of bringing together common issues. Yeah.
I think your question was actually, can planners do something about it? And the short answer to that is yes.
Great. Well, please join me in thanking both Sam and